Okay, I want to first say sorry to all three of you. I tried my very hardest to find a hat with horns on it, but it's really, really hard to find a hat with horns when you're in lockdown and no shops are open. So I want to apologise for that. And then I was gonna sit on a giant flamingo, but again, can't find a giant flamingo anywhere in lockdown, and it was too late to get one on Amazon Prime.
Oh
So
no, yeah, I was gonna say Amazon. Amazon is your friend here.
I know, I know. So I want to kind of throw to each one of you just to start with, just to kind of get your involvement in the film. Obviously, Jacob and Bron, you're a couple of the main protagonists alongside Zach and Thor. And Heather, I know you're the filmmaker. So let's start with you, Heather. When you saw this footage for the first time, and when all this footage was getting put together, what was your initial reaction to the adventure that these guys had been on?
Well, I think I sat down, I think, with Bronwyn and like saw some of the highlights. And so you kind of see like the most interesting or like the funniest moments first. And I was like, man, there's some gold in here. Like there's so much heart in this adventure. And I knew that they'd had a really fun time. Like I know that their like style of expedition was going to be really fun. And so the first stuff I saw was like, oh yeah, there's gold in here. And then it's a matter of like understanding this whole trip that they've been on and like how that story arc flows and like pulling it together into a cohesive 34-minute film. But I knew that there were going to be some real gems in there.
Jacob, how did you come up with this? Give us a little like background if people haven't seen the film. Firstly,
I
what
mean,
the adventure was, and then
all right. The background starts. I was studying to do a PhD in mathematics, which is why I'm Jacob Cook TA instead of just Jacob Cook here, because I have a second life as a mathematician. And I gradually realized that climbing big cliffs was like the thing that I wanted to do more than anything else, including maths. And then over like the sort of 5 to 10 years that followed that, I basically just like dropped everything else in my life to focus on as much climbing as I possibly could. And that coincided with meeting Bronwyn. And we just sort of started doing everything we could. We kind of moved into her grandparents' old Subaru and just like drove it around the States and just climbing big cliffs as much as we could. So places like Yosemite, but also like Zion National Park in Utah and a bunch of other places, and just gradually started forming this base of experience for like how to approach big cliffs like that. But then always like the dream for me is going to these like super remote places and being able to do the kind of big wall climbing out there. And so this was actually my third attempt to go to Baffin Island. I tried to go in 2015, tried to go again in 2016, and then this was attempt number 3 where it finally all came together. And yeah, I mean, just being there really was the main motivation. Like I just wanted to go, and I always said like even if we climbed nothing, just standing underneath Mount Asgard would be like a huge success for me. It's just one of the most wild places on earth, and so just getting out there really was the main motivation.
I mean, some of the footage that's in the film and also the photos that are around the film as well are absolutely unbelievable. Like there's one moment in the film which I love when you and Bron are at the top of the one mountain, and then over on the other mountain you can just see in the distance Zach and Thor, who have just summited. They're like two little Monopoly characters almost.
Yeah. I always wonder if people can see that, like, because I see them because I know that they're there, but in the footage I'm always like, can people see that?
Yeah,
you can. So that's great.
Ron, for you then, when you first met Jacob and then he dragged you around doing all these amazing, wonderful adventures.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could say it started by Jacob had already been climbing for quite a while before when we started dating, but it soon became like both of, I don't know if I was being dragged around the whole time. I mean, I was just as much into it as he was pretty quickly.
Bron was pretty on board with the plan.
So when Jacob first mentioned Baffin Island to you, then what were your thoughts on going there and experiencing that as well.
Yeah, so the first couple of times that Jacob tried to organize expeditions to Baffin Island, I was actually working seasonally as a Northern River guide in Canada. So I was kind of on these big guided expeditions that for work by river, and so I had like a lot of experience, like kind of doing the logistical side of how to exist in this very remote location for a long period of time, like months at a time. But I was always busy working in the season that Jacob was planning these trips, and then I kind of finished my 7th season working as that, and took I guess then had that time available to put our efforts together and like go on this big trip together, bringing both of our experiences, rock climbing, as well as kind of some experience he had from previous expeditions and my experience from these guided like river expeditions, and kind of put that all together and like both of us go out there.
In terms of like long-term wilderness logistics and like how to survive in the wilderness for like months at a time, and also like the like water side of the trip, like Bronwyn is definitely the expert. Like in a way, like I introduced her to climbing, but like in terms of the wilderness side of things, like I would definitely say Bronwyn is like the captain. Bronwyn's the captain.
Complemented each other.
I was going to ask that about the wilderness side of things. How for something like this that you know you're going to be out there for 6 weeks plus, Bron, you're probably best to answer this. How do you go about planning what you need, what to take, and how to take it?
Well, I really like lists, so you get really into writing lots of lists. Yeah, just being really like on it and organized, and kind of I have this whole like equipment list, and then a major part of that is menu planning. Like that's probably the biggest like single area of like logistical preparation. And we were dehydrating a lot of our meals beforehand. Kind of it was basically a year of like preparation leading up to this trip, and that included the menu planning, sort of gathering the right equipment, and then also just like logistics of getting there. It's a tricky place to it's a pretty hard place to get to.
Heather, have you ever thought about, after watching the film and producing the film, directing the film, have you ever thought about making a film, a fitness movie, surrounding cheese ball crunches, maybe a whole cheese ball workout? Is that something you thought about?
It's funny that you asked that. It's definitely come up a few times, like some of the silly things that you can do for fitness training, just to, it's not crossed my mind.
That was one of the first when Heather was saying we came back really excited after the trip to show Heather the footage, and one of the first things we showed her was this like cheese ball scene. She was just like, I mean, I think she was pretty into it, but
what you don't see in that cheese ball crunches, what you don't see in that cheese ball crunches scene is that we've all been sitting in tents in the rain for like a week at this point, and it's the first like break in the rain, and we're just like, oh my God, being outside is so exciting.
That's one of the things I love about this film is there are so many of those moments. There are so many what I referred to in my notes when I watched the film a couple of times, cheese ball crunches moments. There are those moments that like you smile, and there are those moments that like the chemistry between you and Bron, and also between you guys, Zach and Thor as well. Like the chemistry is just incredible, and I think that really helps make the film. Heather, when you're going through and you're in the edit and you're seeing these moments, that must feel as a filmmaker quite a special process to be involved in.
Yeah, and that's why I think as a filmmaker, like I wasn't worried really about themselves shooting this project. Like I've seen Jacob's footage from other projects before, and I just, when the athletes are doing it themselves, like you lose maybe a bit of the production value, but you also get like whoever's holding the camera is like a big part of the team, and these are really close friends and they're really tight relationships, and that all comes out in the footage you get, which is just such a special thing. Like it's very real, and you really feel like you're there because the camera isn't an obstacle, and it's not, I know it was like a lot of work for them to self-film this, but it's also like the camera is just like part of the whole situation. So you just like feel like you're there with them, which is really, really special. Like everyone's super natural on camera, and everyone's just like really comfortable being there, and you can tell that really comes across in the story.
And even though there are those cheeseball crunches moments, which we'll get onto a few more of them in the future, there must have been some point in that 6-week journey that you guys were out there that you thought to yourself, oh God, what are we doing here? Oh God, this is a nightmare. There must have been at some point you were sitting in a tent, or you were halfway up a cliff, or and you just thought, I could do with being home now. Jacob, was there any down moments for you?
Yeah, I mean most days, like the the reality of doing something like this is that just like there's an awful lot of grind, and like just carrying heavy bags across like difficult terrain and like in the rain, and just like but yeah, the thing that made all of that okay was like the team that we were in, and I think that's one of the things that I really liked that you said about your impression from the movie, was like you got a feeling for like the chemistry between the four of us. And I think when I set out to make this movie, more than anything else, because like the story of like epic cliff, tiny people, like will they survive, has been told so many times. And the story that I wanted to tell with this movie was about the human relationships and kind of like the bond that we formed with the four of us over our 6 weeks in the wilderness together, or 7 weeks. Yeah, so yeah, the trip was really hard, and I think in a different team with a different group of people, that might have really like started to get me down. But there's just this kind of like never-ending positivity about like Zach and Thor and Bronwyn and myself when I'm in that group, like that just kind of makes all of that stuff minor, and we're all just always on the same page about and also it's not only the never-ending positivity, it's also about just like trust.
Yeah.
Okay, all three of the people that I was on the trip with, there's just this kind of implicit trust and respect for like the decision-making process, especially around like dangerous decisions and stuff, where like I just really respect their opinion. And if they say, oh, I'm not sure we should do it like this, I think we should do it like this, I'm like, oh, okay, I should listen to this. And I think that's another big
I think it's really interesting here you say that, because I've watched a lot of outdoor films, helped make a couple as well, and you risk everyone potentially becoming the same as the one previous. And what I found really special with this one was that although you are in one of the most beautiful places on planet Earth, like there's no question about that, and the footage is incredible and the stills are incredible, every time I think about this film, and I've watched it probably 4 times to this point, every time I think about it, I just think about you four. And I don't, like, secondary to that is where you are, which is so weird. Like, that's not the norm for an outdoor film, which I think is why this is kind of what it is, and is, I think, very well, brilliantly put together. Bron, I need to ask you about this flamingo. First, whose idea was it to take an inflatable flamingo with you? That doesn't seem like it should have made it onto a list. So let me put it like that.
Make it onto the equipment list. It was at the top of the equipment list. So I guess there's a bit of background story there. That Jacob and I made a film, just a short film. It's on YouTube. Of climbing El Capitan in Yosemite 6 years ago. Where am I at, Jacob?
6 years ago.
And we had a life-size inflatable, like human-size inflatable shark that we hauled up the cliff with you. And especially like in that sort of scenario where you're hauling all of your equipment and food and water up the side of El Cap, you're really like trying to cut weight whenever possible and really take like only like the essential things. And so it's just kind of making light of that and be like, well, some things are worthwhile taking for like entertainment. It's not all about the seriousness. And so we made this film with the inflatable shark. We called him Sheriff the Shark. And so I guess that sort of spurred the theme. And when we were in preparation for this trip and it was looking like we were going to be combining the river, like whitewater paddling portion, it just came together. It made sense to have another like floatable inflatable to kind of spice and make things, I don't know, less serious and yeah, I try and avoid the attitude of like everything must be really serious at all times because this is like a serious trip, and then remember why we're there, and the reason we're there is to like have fun and enjoy our time with the people who we're with, and sometimes something like that should be at the top of the list.
But I did not expect the whitewater flamingo to be a whitewater flamingo. I thought we were gonna maybe float on the lake on it, maybe we'd like get it out at a campsite. But then when Bronwyn started like shooting class 3 rapids, like paddling the flamingo like a solo canoe, that was a surprise for sure.
Dare I say, some of the best paddling footage in the entire film is on that flamingo.
I know.
You're flying. There was one point.
Bronwyn was the only one who was able to solo paddle the flamingo.
Yeah, well, I mean, I'm the only one who was a river guide for 7 years, but yeah.
There is that.
There's a lot of like background experience going into that, not just fluke.
It takes a lot of experience to solo paddle a flamingo.
That's what I was about to say. If you want to solo paddle a flamingo, 7
years of training.
Do it. Is this going to be a continuing theme though? Are we going for more inflatable animals when there are more trips? 100%.
For sure.
Sure.
Yeah. I mean, it's not
hard to
predict,
question,
really. Like, of course, yeah.
Whether it's inflatable or whether it's just, I think definitely a reoccurring theme of something unexpected.
Something unexpected. I like it. Something unexpected is brilliant.
Nice.
Like I said, there's so many smile moments, so many like laugh out loud moments as well. For I'm going to ask each of you for a highlight. So Heather, when you were putting it together, I know highlights are horrible because you don't want to say, oh, this is my highlight and offend somebody else, but I'm going to ask you anyway. So Heather, what would you say would be your highlight, having watched the footage and put the whole thing together?
I don't know. I have to think about it for a second. Can someone else go first?
Jacob, you go first. Go on.
Wait, about like the trip or about like the process of making the film? I guess
about either.
There's a lot to think about here.
I know it's a lot. It's a lot. It's a big question. What do you reckon, Jacob? You go first.
Ooh.
I think I thought it was.
All right, Bronwyn's going first.
It's a highlight of like a moment on the trip, and I think we already actually alluded to it a few minutes ago, but there was 2 moments, but they're similar, so I'm putting them together as one moment.
Yeah, you can do
that. 2 moments on the trip. One actually on the very first mountain that we climbed, and this sort of parallel situation happened on the very last mountain that we climbed, and that was where often we climbed into 2 teams. So Jacob and I would climb together, and Thor and Zach would climb together, and we would roughly try and climb like in the same area, either on the same mountain or neighboring mountains. And there were these 2 moments that we were climbing neighboring mountains, kind of across a chasm above a glacier, and we've been climbing for 16, 17, 18 hours or something, but the whole time we had each other on like radios between the teams, and we could also just often within, like, we had a visual on, we could just make them out on the other side of the cliff. And so the first time on Mount Asgard, Jacob and I are climbing the south tower of Mount Asgard, and Thor and Zach are climbing the north tower. And we arrive at the summit almost at the same time. Like, Jacob and I are standing on the summit. It's the sun is low on the horizon. Just like everything is kind of purple, dusky, but it doesn't actually get dark. And we look over and we can see Thor and Zach like just below their summit, and like looking over the edge, and we just start cheering out loud, like whooping, like whoa, and the sound carries, and then we hear there's like a few moments delay, and then their sound carries back, and we're just like shouting across this chasm, like from both summits of the towers of Mount Asgard. And it was just like, you're so wrapped up in the dangers and the difficulties and the grind that Jacob was referring to then just have this moment where you're brought out of all of that and just thinking about like where you are and how beautiful it is, and that you're sharing that with the other team, kind of like at the same moment, even across this big space. And then it just happened with complete chance that the identical scene on the final mountain when we were climbing a tower next to Mount Ulu, and they were climbing Mount Ulu on the very last day of our trip. And we arrived at the summit almost exactly the same time, and again could see their silhouettes on the top, and just make out this like faint cheering in the background, like across.
In somewhere so vast as well, like that.
Kind of,
that has to feel super special, because like you're gonna feel secluded when you're the only 4 people in hundreds and like miles and miles and miles, but then just to see them again, it just brings it back to that human element, which is amazing. And in the film as well, I think I can't remember at what mountain you're at the top of, but another one of my favorite moments is when Jacob and Bronwyn, you're doing like selfie camera, and you're saying just cheer, and you're doing that. You're doing.
And I'm going, ah!
Just do normal cheering.
Just do a normal cheer. Let's move on to your highlight then, Jacob. What do you think?
I think the highlight for me that I get when watching the film is like right at the end, the credit scene was like hanging out with the kids in Pangatone, and yeah, that was kind of spearheaded by Thor, because Thor had actually spent a summer living in Pangatone, and it's a tiny community of like less than 1,000 people, and he'd actually lived there for a summer a number of years before, and so he had some contacts in the town and just knew some kind of context. But yeah, like getting to interact with the locals and do something fun and like share some of our excitement about climbing was like super fun, and like, yeah, the kids are just really cute. So I think that like that kind of ties the film together quite nicely. And yeah, I think that's like a major highlight of watching the film for me.
Yeah, the way Heather put that, I don't know, it just like gives me like the really good like, feel good, like I don't know, like you end on like this warm fuzzies.
It hits you right in the feels, doesn't it? It's really a special moment.
Yeah, and they love the horns so much. Like with the kids, they like normally like when you're taking kids like to do outdoor things, that they're like, oh, I don't want to wear a helmet, but they were all fighting over the helmet because it had these giant Viking horns on it. It was great.
Dare I say it? Skills on the flamingo as well. They had good skills on the flamingo.
Yeah, that was it. Like 3 a.m, and like all the kids are just like awake, because I guess it's 24-hour daylight in the summer, so they all just like lose their clocks, and they were just jumping on the flamingo, and it's like Arctic water, and like, I was just like,
yeah, that's
please. One guy you just see in the background of the one shot is just paddling one side, and he's just doing like, mate, do the other one as well. and you, Heather, what would be your highlight?
I think my highlight for me, because I watching all the footage, like taking it right back to that experience, like watching all the footage from something, it takes a long time. It can be a bit of a difficult process, but the number of times these guys made me literally laugh out loud, like that doesn't happen most of the time when I'm just watching a bunch of footage. But there's a number of moments where they're just like being so silly, and you can just like see the friendships and everybody's having so much fun, and it's just like this big reminder, just like, why do we do these mountain sports? Like, we do them to have fun, right? The point is to kind of find more joy in life and like have deeper relationships with the people who are close to you. But a couple of things that stood out to me was like when there's the flamingo paddling sequence, and I started cutting that with like some samba music when Thor's dancing, and then at the end he's just like drinking rum in a little cup, like getting drunk, and then they just start throwing the flamingo at him, and they did it so many times. one more take. And I mean, I was just sitting there because I'm watching everything and I have no idea what's coming. So there's a few moments like that where you're just like, what are they doing right now? This is amazing.
It's like comedy genius comes from complete seclusion, doesn't it? When you've got nothing else to do, it's just like, comedy genius just happens.
You can make like a bloopers reel in the background of all the things that were cut.
That's a good idea. Heather, get on it.
Well, because it's so unexpected too. And there's one shot where Jacob's filming Zach and Thor on the shoulder of Mount Thor, and they're hiking up. And I don't know how they start, but they're like, they start taking their shirts off, and it just takes so long because they keep getting stuck on the helmet. And it's so ridiculous. And it's just, yeah, there's a number of fun.
I really liked what you said about joy, because I find like people say like, oh, you know, it's about having fun, but I think having fun doesn't really capture it. It's about really like experiencing the joy of like being out in a wild remote place like that with a group of people that you're really, really close with, and you have this really like tight bond with, that you form over like a long time of being in the wilderness together. And yeah, it is. I think it's joy, and I think that's what I wanted to come across in the film, and that's what I think Heather's done a great job of like bringing to the front of the footage. The like hundreds of hours of shaky footage we came back with, Heather has somehow turned it into a story
you guys
that
did a good job.
Shows across gets across the joy that we felt out there.
Yeah.
And I think, like you said, that's
and I like the way it comes together, because you've got this like feeling of joy, and like this, it's fun, but the joy part I think comes from that contrast with like how hard it is, and you guys are suffering, and you work so hard to get out there, and the weather's tough, and you're like doing this all human powered from town, which is highly unusual and a ton of effort, and like you're suffering and you're doing some big serious routes, and it's scary. And I think that contrast is what gets you like that feeling of pure joy when you do get to let go a little bit. Like that contrast is what really makes it for me.
Mm-hmm.
It's a special film. I really do think it's a special film, and I don't think it would have been the same if there was any other combination of people. So if you're watching this interview, person that's watching this interview, and you haven't been to see you haven't seen the film yet, please watch the film. And if you've watched the film, go and watch it again, because there are moments in the film where you miss the first time almost, because there's so much going on. There's so many of those cheeseball moments, as I say again, that you miss the first time. So go back and watch it. And guys, thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to do this. And hopefully I'll see you soon.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ben. Thanks for making it happen.